Welcome everyone to the first show in what is going to be an exciting time on our extraordinary educational journey that we have labeled Authentic African Voices. And my co-host, well, what do you know? Edwin, we've been good schoolmates and best of family friends for more than 3 decades now. I'm excited about this authentic audiovisual journey. What about you?
Yes, I am. And our audience must know that we are two, I want to say, morally perfect and enterprising young men who have proven themselves beyond doubt in their respective careers. And so, Ben, I'd like you to share with them your accomplishments, some of your accomplishments.
Well, I'm still very young, but I've been around for over 30 years as a professional. Many in Nigeria know me as a well-established journalist. I started my journalism career right out of college, and I worked with the best journalists out there, including my mentor, Dele Giwa, former editor of Newswatch, who's no longer with us. And we travel around the world on journalism assignments. I've been to about 18 countries. And I moved to the United States about 28 years ago. And my experience here is in public relations, journalism, and I've also worked for the state on several levels. So I am a well-established professional. Family-wise, I'm blessed to have 3 children, 2 from my previous marriage and 1 from my current relationship with my very beautiful fiancée in Nigeria, and we're blessed with a daughter. And so I am blessed in so many ways, and I thank God for that.
Yes, quite a great accomplishment. 18 countries, that shows how well traveled and how wide ranging your exposure is. My trip has been a little bit more circuitous than yours. Remember, we met back in the 80s in University of Calabar. And my first degree there was in sociology, after which I went to the UK and I studied law at the University of Buckingham, where I got my LLB honors degree. And shortly thereafter, I actually moved back to Nigeria for a bit, took the bar, became a barrister and solicitor there, and practiced law in Nigeria for a little bit before I got the itch to go back to Europe, and I went back to England. From where I came to California and took the California State Bar and started practicing law here since 1998. Since then, I've had my own law practice where I've operated as a solo practitioner. I like to say that my experience has carried me through 3 continents: the continent of Africa, the continent of Europe, and of course, North America. And I've come to bring all of that experience to bear in my practice here. But this is a new journey that I'm taking on the radio, on the podcast. And Ben, you want to share some light on that and what we intend to cover in this podcast?
Yeah, we've got so much to cover, and I'm just excited about the topics, the vast areas that we're going to be talking about. And what the focus of this show we'll try to carry everybody along, every demographic out there. And, they talk about the 7 mountains, and I'd like Edwin to talk some more about that.
Yes. So the approach, the focus is going to be on 7 pillars as it reflects from an African continental perspective. So we're talking about the pillars of politics, religion, business, sports, entertainment, education, and cuisine, but not necessarily in that order. We feel that these are 7 topics that spans mankind and our daily lives, and we want to touch upon them as reflected in the African perspective.
Yeah, and there's going to be so much more, including fluffy topics like cooking. We have to get the women involved too. Heard about one president who said that men don't belong in the kitchen, so everybody belongs in the kitchen. And what else have we forgotten? Oh yes, we'll tap from a brain trust of experts let's start from the beginning. Brain trust of experts will include a lot of professional broadcasters out there, like Namdi Maweta, who's a very well-known broadcaster in Los Angeles. And by the way, we're broadcasting from Los Angeles, the capital of Hollywood, where everything happens. Good things for us, though. And, backtracking a little bit, let's talk about how long we've been friends. How many years now, Edwin?
1980, so almost 40 years.
Yes, Edwin. I do remember 1980. That year very well was the one year that had the campus abuzz with the Fela Roy Ayers concert at Malabo, as the campus is known. That was the biggest tour in Nigeria for that year. And what a remarkable collaboration from that tour, which produced a musical gem titled Music of Many Colors. I remember on the A side of that album for Fela was Africa Center of the World. And on the B side for Roy Ayers' production was 2,000 Blacks Got to Be Free. That was a remarkable tour. And I, met so many good people on that show, including Victor Oladokun, who's a very well-known voice out there in broadcasting with the Christian Broadcasting Network. 2,000 Blacks Got to Be Free. Roy Ayers is still out there preaching that same message. And Music of Many Colors is a song about Africa, the cradle of today's civilization. And Fela's theme song for that tour was recorded 21 years after he left Nigeria's shores. The song emphasizes Africa's place as the center of the world, as not by an accident, rather because we were the first people on earth. Adding that the territory has been man's major reason for going to war, ideological or weaponized. We all remember how Africa was partitioned in the late 19th century. And so if Africans occupy the best area in the world, that is not by accident. Africans must have been the strongest people to occupy the center of the world. First humans were discovered there. Well, let's let our audience know a little bit about that music from that 1980 tour when we first met. Let's play a clip for our audience. Yeah, that's the inimitable Fela Kuti, the one and only Fela, who's gone now, and everybody knows what he's done for the African continent. And here we are, almost 40 years after that song, and I think we've lost some sense of what he was out there doing with his music. Do you think Africans really get the idea from that tour and the significance of Africa and the evolution of mankind, Edwin?
Well, Ben, 40 years later, unfortunately, I have to say no. Most of those countries in the continent have turned 60 years now post-independence. Nigeria, for example, Ghana, 61. And what we've seen in the 40 years since Fela came out with that song is the brain drain from the continent. We now have a micro country in the West of Africans in diaspora. We all, at the beginning, left our shores to go study overseas with the intentions of going back home and making our continent better. But what has happened is our leaders have created a system that has been so oppressive and not progressive that people end up just staying in the West, which has a more functional system. And so 40 years later, I think we've regressed, unfortunately. And for you, Ben, I know you also came to the U.S. in the 90s, living a very, very flourishing journalistic profession. So why did you do that?
So many reasons. So many reasons. At that time, we had a military dictatorship. And, I left Nigeria in '89 because, one, there was what they call brown envelope journalism. There was no form of accountability. And a couple of years before that, my editor, Dele Giwa, was assassinated. We still don't know who killed him. And I had personal threats on my life too, for being a journalist. So I had to leave Nigeria and came here, and it was it was a good move in many ways, and came here in '89, and I've been so fortunate. I wouldn't change what has happened in my life, and I came here courtesy of the United States Embassy in Lagos. It was a cultural exchange program facilitated by the United States Information Service. And so I was here as a correspondent for Newswatch, traveling around. I was based in Los Angeles, meeting and hobnobbing with some very influential people. I remember interviewing Jermaine Jackson, Quincy Jones. I was supposed to interview Jerry Rice and Joe Montana at that time. But the biggest interview my first year in the United States was an interview I had with Anita de France, who at that time was the only black female member of the International Olympic Committee and president of the Amateur Athletic Foundation of Los Angeles. And it was such a privilege and an eye-opener to chat with her on on a number of topics, ranging from sports, apartheid, South Africa, and how the identity of the black race was being eroded at that time. And I don't think much has changed. Anita de France is still very well active in the Olympic community. And she actually opened my eyes on the problems that the black people are facing in America at that time. And she was also very vocal about apartheid South Africa. I sat with her for about 4 hours in our office, and she was very emotional about some of the topics we talked about. Especially the American perspective of apartheid and the efforts from here, which she thought was lacking to ease the plight of oppressed people over there. And here's what she told me at that time in 1990 about apartheid South Africa. Absolutely not. I think we know what the deal is because we have lived through it, and that means oppression. Everyone says, okay, the schools are integrated. 21 years later, the schools are still not integrated. And besides integrating schools, it's not what it's about.
You're talking about in South Africa?
Yes, that was in the early 90s before Mandela became president.
Yes.
Yeah, and besides integrating schools, it's not what it is about. This country will not have equal opportunity until housing is integrated. And, she talked about identity crisis among African Americans too. At that time, African Americans were called Negroes, and she said 20 years ago, other people were calling us things. Now we are calling ourselves what we are. That's the big difference. 21 years ago, all the media was controlled by white Americans or European Americans. Now that's not quite the case. So now perhaps we can speak more truth about where we come from. For years and years, we were told we didn't come from any place. We were slaves. Well, that's just not true. So it's now important to me to acknowledge the fact. And she, and I also told you about how she told me about the rising political
profile, like David Dinkins being elected mayor of New York.
Yeah.
Doug Wilder, governor of Virginia.
Yeah.
Those were astronomical events and career moves in the history of African Americans in this country. But in the meantime, I think we need to take a little break and have our listeners simmer down on what we've told them so far.
Yeah, it's a lot, and welcome to the journey.
And we'll see them on the other side of the break.
You're listening to Authentic African Voices with Edwin Imafua and Ben Idopai. The Authentic African Voices is brought to you by the law offices of Edwin Imafua for all your immigration, personal injury, bankruptcy, living trusts, and estate planning issues. Contact the law offices of Edwin Imafua at 818-855-1118. That's 818-855-1118. Now back to Authentic African Voices with Edwin Imafua and Ben Idopai.
Ben, now that you have apprised us with the historical perspectives for the show, why don't we talk about Nigeria? I remember Nelson Mandela, the late Nelson Mandela once said that the world will not respect Africa until Nigeria earns that respect. And unfortunately, 60 years post-independence, Nigeria still does not have a true identity. It has not found a resourceful and decisive leader, and has not earned the respect of other African nations. So how do you feel about that, and what do you want to share on that?
My dear friend, you're right on point. And, sometimes I feel like weeping when I think of the lost potentials of Nigeria. I just returned from Nigeria, and there's a lot of anxiety over there about the economy and the stability. And because of Buhari's leadership style, there is even fear of another civil war, and I think top military brass are concerned about his indecisiveness and leadership style. I think he lacks capable advisors and surrounded by sycophants. Believe it or not, another civil war in Nigeria will indeed be a global catastrophe. Remember, we're talking about a country with almost 200 million people. And so the world has to wake up and realize that a crisis there will trigger a refugee crisis 10 times worse than what we are seeing in Syria right now.
Yes. And I recall reading a report by the HSBC Bank. It was a very, very far-reaching report on the economy and the country of Nigeria, and it painted a very, very, very bad fiscal future for the country. And one thing stood out in that report I read, which is that Nigeria were basically just papering over the cracks, and that is a very, very serious diagnosis of the entire country. Everything is almost like having a plaster, as I say, on a sipping wound without putting any kind of disinfectant or antibiotic on it. It's definitely going to fester and get worse. What do you feel about that?
That's very, very correct. Very, very correct. President Buhari returning raises the risk of limited economic progress, further fiscal deterioration, prolonging the stagnation of his first term, particularly if there's no move towards completing reform of the exchange rate system or fiscal adjustments that diversify the government revenues away from oil will prove catastrophic.
Now, that exchange rate thing has been a real debacle. Why do you think they can't come up with a clear-cut policy on that?
I just don't know. I mean, they've had some... Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala was a very good...
finance minister
with World Bank experience. I remember even before I came to the U.S., the Nigerian naira was exchanging $2 to $1. But here we are 40 years now, and the naira is about $353 to $1. That's why the economy is stuck.
That's in our lifetime.
It's very scary. And so that's why the HSBC report is very, very, very timely and needs to be looked at very, very carefully. HSBC, as we all know, is Europe's largest financial institution by total assets. And we just pray that Nigeria gets it right in the next elections next year. And like I said before, the country has a population of almost 200 million people, 1/4 of the population of Africa. And if Nigeria fails, the black race has failed.
Totally. I agree with that.
And a disclaimer, I don't have any affiliations with HSBC. I don't have any foreign bank accounts. So this is just a journalist talking.
And it's been said that 1 in 5 Africans are Nigerians. But what does this really mean?
Uh, that's a heavy statement, and I think that was taken from a lecture a few years ago by the former American ambassador to Nigeria, Ambassador Princeton Lyman, at a speech at Brown University, where he talked about the Nigerian state and U.S. strategic interest. And I kind of have a close link with Ambassador Lyman, going all the way back to 1988 when he was the U.S. ambassador in Lagos. My uncle then had a restaurant called Pentagon where the ambassador was hosted to a private dinner with his wife. And I also remember he was interviewed by my former magazine, Newswatch. So Ambassador Lyman is one of the most knowledgeable American diplomats about the African continent. And so he knows what he's saying. And, if 1 in 5 Africans are Nigerians and we still don't have it right, then there's reasons to be concerned. Why don't you tell us more about that speech by Ambassador Lyman?
Yes, I recall this was done at the Chino Achebe Forum. And I think the context of all of that was him saying that Nigeria has perhaps an overinflated understanding of their role or their position in Africa, that they think that the country is basically too big to fail. And the crux of his argument was that not anymore. Even though this speech was given almost a decade ago, whereby he said strategically Nigeria is losing influence in the continent rapidly. And that statement still holds true today. The fact that we produce oil perhaps more than all the other countries in the continent, and the fact that we're almost 200 million people, we take it for granted that everybody is going to need us one way or the other. But the truth of the matter is, because of bad governance, bad leadership, lack of vision in our leaders, the rest of the continent are not following us anymore. Do you agree with that, Ben?
Very well so, very, very well so. And, I remember reading about 5 months ago, there was a big conference in Rwanda, an African Union summit on a continental trade pact. That almost every African country was there, and President Buhari declined to attend at the last minute. And the statement from Abuja was, Mr. President will no longer be traveling to Kigali for the event because certain key stakeholders in Nigeria indicated that they had not been consulted, for which reasons they had some concerns on the provisions of the treaty. Consequently, the president's decision is to allow time for broader consultations on the issue. That's about 50-something, more than 40-something African countries coming together. And the so-called giant of Africa wasn't there. So that's a glaring lack of indecisiveness, which I think made some African countries lose respect for Nigeria. And, we also remember how the president visited Washington, D.C., and failed to make any good impression with President Trump. Even the president acknowledged that Buhari to be a weak leader. I thought President Buhari would use that opportunity to have our president clarify his shithole statement, but he never said anything to that effect. And I think a lot of Africans were disappointed by that lack of, indecisiveness or boldness to have President Trump clarify that statement. That was the best opportunity for him to, as the leader of the most populous African country, to clarify that issue.
And the problem gets even deeper than that. If you recall, when the U.S. had her first black president, Obama, he did not even visit Nigeria. And that, again, that's a poignant reminder of the country losing its influence in that sphere. Now, with regards to the Kigali conference that Buhari failed to attend. Obviously, my hat's off to the Republic of Rwanda and what they've accomplished post-genocide. I was reading a statistical report on Rwanda the other day. Kigali is actually the 5th cleanest city in the world, ahead of Singapore. And that is an African country. And that's where you see the shift in influence. These conferences are being held in Kigali now as opposed to Lagos or Abuja. So that is significant, and we need to pay attention to that.
Yes. Rwanda is a remarkable place. I have some good friends from there. And I remember attending Rwanda Cultural Day 2 years ago in San Francisco and watched President Kagame speak. Made some good friends there, including former Miss Rwanda, Kate, who's my good friend.
Yeah. So Ben, I want to talk a little bit about what has been in the news quite a bit this past week, and that's the U.S. Open and Serena Williams. And a lot of what I'm going to say, you may not agree, but it's my opinion. I think even though nobody wants to clear-cut come out and say it, I think the blame for all of that debacle lies strictly in front of that umpire. If I had an opinion to make, I would say Carlos Ramos, who is a Portuguese, incidentally, should not be given such, maybe not even umpire a game again, but at least not a game of that magnitude. And Serena stated that she was treated the way she was because she's a woman. But I even make bold to say that it's more than that. I think it's a race thing. And the truth of the matter is that because of who she is, an African American, a black woman, an umpire can think that a champion who has sat on the throne for almost 2 decades, almost 20 years, he can completely disregard her and there will be no consequences to it. And that is the same way, I think, for the most part, we black people have to deal on the world table. We come to the world table as toddlers where adults are feasting, because if you look beyond us to our continent, our leaders have not given us anything to be proud of. Now, I segue to that because that is manifested in what Serena has had to go through. Now, go back to 2004, if you remember, when she was playing Jennifer Capriati in the quarterfinals. Incidentally, the umpire that day was also from Portugal. Mariana Alves is her name, whereby, she overruled a line judge who said the ball was clearly in. She said it was out. Of course, Serena lost that game, lost the match to Jennifer, and the very next day, the United States Tennis Association had to apologize to her. That's exactly what Carlos Ramos should have done. He is the umpire. These players have worked hard for the year to get to that point, and to just not be able to have the temperament to call her aside and tell her to calm down when she's in the passionate mode, and therefore cost her the Grand Slam. I think it has to do with race, and it also has to do with sex, but more importantly, a race. Because guess what? She was playing at home. She was given a home court advantage. Because if she was a white superstar champion, they would have given her some concessions. But being black, you get none. And more importantly, there was that cartoon from Australia. I don't know if you recall reading that. McKnight, and he's tried to defend it. That cartoon has been around the internet. So I think a lot of our listeners have seen it, whereby she was caricatured and made to look like the Negroes of the past with the red pouting lips. And on the other hand, Naomi Osaka, who is biracial, her dad is black, her dad is Asian American, and her mom Japanese. He whitewashes her; she's all white, but makes Serena looks like the enemy of doom. And then the umpire makes him look so calm, telling Osaka, "Oh, why don't you just let her win?" If he had been that calm and respectful toward Serena during the game, all of that would not have happened. So that's my take, and I segue that to say, once our leaders can clean up our continent, we will get more respect around the world. The reason why black people are looked at as inferior is because our continent makes us look that way, and that's because of the
Well,
lack of leadership of our leaders.
I think we have a separate show on Serena and Venus. Those are two ladies after my heart. Serena was right to challenge that judge. Some people call him Carlos the Jackal. I don't want to be disrespectful, but she had a genuine concern. And Serena, she plays with her heart. She always says, if I don't get it right, I don't stop until I do. And so she's going to be fiery on the court. I mean, they've criticized her at Indian Wells, monkey chants, and all that kind of stuff, but that doesn't get to her. But I think she was really upset that day. And so, we brought this Serena topic because we're going to be having a topic du jour on each of our show, and Serena was the topic for today. So, dear Africans and friends of Africa, stay with us because there are some things you will hear here and discover here that you will not find anywhere else. So that's our show for today. And Serena and Venus, I love you both.
Keep up the good work.
Yeah, Long Beach, was my first home when I first got to America. So I know. Thank you.
And for all our listeners, stay blessed. God bless you all.